The K9 wouldn't move. His bark echoed through the street, louder, sharper, right outside a quiet barbershop. But when officers stepped inside and pulled open that hidden door, no one was prepared for what they saw. What was really going on behind those chairs? Before we roll into the full video, drop your favorite dog's name in the comments and make sure you've subscribed. Briar Street was the kind of place where people waved from porches, where shopkeepers knew customers by name, and where the smell of roasted coffee from Donnie's Diner mixed with the distant hum of early traffic. It wasn't glamorous, but it was safe, at least that's what everyone thought. Until one Tuesday morning when a dog refused to stop barking outside a barbershop. Officer Miles Vance had just rolled down his window when he first heard it. His canine partner, Ranger, a striking sable-coated Belgian Malinois with a calm, intense stare, sat in the rear of the cruiser, still as a statue. Then he heard it again. A bark, then another. And it was not Ranger. The sound echoed sharp across the quiet street, coming from somewhere down by Reggie's Cuts, the oldest barber shop in town. The shop was tucked between a small laundromat and a closed-down appliance repair store. A few locals were already out for their morning walks, but none stood close to the shop. Most were frozen near the corners, eyes focused on something just out of Miles's view. Ranger finally moved. His head turned. He let out a low growl. And then, something he rarely did, he began to bark, pacing tight circles in the rear seat. Miles knew that bark. He had heard it only a handful of times during his 5 years with Ranger. It was not alerting to narcotics. It wasn't aggression. It was unease. Ranger wasn't reacting to a scent alone. He was reacting to something deeper, something wrong. Miles stepped out, unclipped the rear latch, and Ranger bounded out with purpose. He bolted straight toward the sidewalk outside Reggie's Cuts, his nose lowered, sniffing the thin crack between the door and the concrete stoop. Then he barked once, loud, demanding, then again and again. The few pedestrians who'd stopped to watch backed away slowly. Miles raised a hand to ease the tension. "It's okay, folks. Just hang back." But even as he spoke, his own nerves were tightening. The barber shop should have been open by now. Reggie was one of the earliest risers in town. He lived just 2 blocks over and opened the shop every day at 6:30 a.m., even on holidays. He was the kind of man who wore pressed shirts and shined his own floors. There was no reason for the lights to be off at nearly 7:15. Ranger scratched at the base of the door once, then backed up. His hackles lifted. Miles leaned in and peered through the narrow window. It was too dark inside to make out much, but something was wrong. The barber chairs were overturned. He called it in as a possible break-in. 2 more units responded within minutes. Still, no answer from inside. The door was locked and the blinds on the windows had been hastily drawn down, something Reggie never did during open hours. A neighbor from above the laundromat came down barefoot and whispered, "I ain't seen Reggie come in this morning. That ain't like him." With probable cause established and no sign of Reggie, the officers entered using a department key previously filed for community safety checks. Ranger pushed forward first. What followed next was not what they expected. The smell hit first, metallic and stale. Ranger darted inside and immediately began barking near the back door that led to the stockroom. Miles followed, his pulse rising. Inside, the place looked like someone had been searching for something, not just tossing things, but looking. Cabinet drawers emptied, sink cabinet beneath the shampoo station cracked open. The wall mirror tilted at a strange angle like someone had tried to see behind it. And on the floor near the back hallway, almost missed among the fallen magazines, was a single dark spot. Dried blood. Miles crouched. "We need forensics, now." The search. They secured the scene and called for evidence technicians. As officers canvassed the surrounding buildings, Ranger remained locked onto one area, the left rear closet. The door had been wedged shut with a broom, almost as if someone wanted it to stay that way. Ranger scratched twice, then growled. Miles opened the door slowly. Inside were cleaning supplies and a duffel bag tucked behind the water heater. Ranger barked once, short and sharp. Inside the duffel were bundles of small envelopes, most sealed, some open, and rolls of cash. Dozens, maybe hundreds. Also inside, a burner phone with recent messages. One was still visible. "We said one drop, Reggie. You promised. What are you hiding?" Miles stepped back. The barbershop hadn't just been a barbershop. It had been a drop site. But for what? Why Reggie? And why was it all suddenly falling apart? The bag no one was supposed to find. When forensics processed the messages, something else stood out. Most of the text exchanges came from unknown numbers, all short coded phrases, but a few of them mentioned intersections across town. The most frequent one, Briar and Holloway. That was 3 blocks away. And that's where, 2 nights ago, someone had broken into a city maintenance truck. The strange thing? Nothing had been stolen except a single orange vest and a traffic cone. Why would anyone go through the trouble to dress like a city worker, unless they were trying not to be noticed? The puzzle pieces weren't fitting, and Reggie was still missing. The dog was the only one who knew where to look next. The pattern only Ranger saw. That night after the shop had been sealed, Miles took Ranger out for one more walk around Briar Street. Ranger paused at the alley behind the shop, one that backed into a narrow access road most people forgot existed. Ranger sniffed the fence line, then bolted. Miles had to sprint to keep up. Behind the alley was an old drainage grate, half covered in ivy. Ranger stopped, tail still, head low. Then came the bark. Miles called in a unit. When they lifted the grate, what they found underneath was not Reggie, but it was something just as haunting. A briefcase, sealed. Inside were ID cards, dozens, most fake, some duplicates, all worn from handling, and one photo that froze Miles cold. It was of Reggie, but the name printed beneath it wasn't his. It read, Marcus Leon. Ranger stood beside him, waiting. And in that moment, Miles realized something chilling. Reggie had not just been the victim of a robbery, he had been hiding something. And whatever he was running from, he might not be running alone. Officer Miles Vance stood in the alley behind the barbershop long after the last forensic bag had been zipped. The late afternoon wind carried the distant hum of traffic and the rustle of leaves caught in old rain gutters. Everything around him moved as if the world hadn't just shifted. But Miles knew better. Reggie, or the man he thought was Reggie, had vanished. And in his place was a folder full of fake IDs bearing the name Marcus Leon. It wasn't a coincidence. The name had popped up in 3 neighboring counties, tied loosely to petty scams and shell properties, but always disappearing just before an arrest was made. And Ranger, his canine partner, still wasn't calm. As Miles placed a hand on the dog's shoulder, Ranger stood stiff, his eyes scanning the alley entrance, then shifting toward the opposite fence, ears twitching. His body dropped slightly, an instinctive stance of focus. Miles followed his gaze. The alley's opposite end curved behind the back of the laundromat, narrowing to a dead end beneath a sagging wooden balcony. It was old, half-rotted, used for nothing but overflow storage from the shop upstairs. As Ranger approached, he began to growl, then bark twice and again. Another alert, another clue. The boards beneath the deck were warped and scattered with leaves and plastic bags. At first glance, it looked abandoned. But when Miles moved closer, he saw something strange. A section of the deck had been lifted recently, just a sliver, then put back down. The dirt around the base was freshly disturbed. Miles called it in. Backup arrived within minutes. With 2 officers watching the perimeter, Miles pulled up the warped boards, and underneath was a narrow rectangular hole carved straight into the earth. Inside was a wooden crate, and nailed to the top of it was a metal plate, rusted, worn, but readable. Property of Camden County Police Evidence Storage, tag 07347. Miles stepped back. Evidence from a case long closed? How had it ended up here? Inside the crate were bags of sealed documents, some covered in mildew, others wrapped in dated police forms from nearly a decade ago. They bore names Miles didn't recognize until one caught his eye. Marcus Leon, seized, 2015, case status inactive. "What the hell is going on?" Miles whispered. One of the forensics techs whistled low. These were supposed to be destroyed after trial. This whole case was buried. But someone had dug it back up. Back at the station, Ranger lay near Miles's desk, eyes open, tracking every movement in the hallway like a sentry. The tech unit managed to digitize and catalog the documents from the crate. Among the files were marked bank transfers, routing numbers connected to shell accounts that bounced between 4 states, all closed. But the most disturbing page was a scanned note. Typed, dated 6 months ago. It read, "Keep it quiet. The names inside lead further than you want to go. If he talks, it all unravels." It wasn't signed, but it was printed on watermarked letterhead from a company called Arkland Protective Services. Miles had never heard of it, but when he looked it up, there was no company website, no business address, just a disconnected phone number and a dozen shell listings in Delaware, Florida, and New Mexico. But in one archived article from 2017, he found a photo of a fundraiser for urban redevelopment protection. Standing among the crowd was a younger version of the man known as Reggie. Not behind the scenes, at the podium, a second identity begins to crumble. Reggie, or Marcus Leon, wasn't just hiding. He had been someone important, connected to an operation that extended beyond Pine Brook, and now he was gone. The police had nothing. No exit record, no witness report, just a locked barbershop, a barking dog, and a trail of secrets someone had wanted forgotten. But Ranger was not done. That evening, during a final sweep of the shop's rear hallway, Ranger once again froze. At first, Miles assumed it was residual scent, but then the dog pawed at a thin sliver along the floorboard just below a coat hook on the wall. The wood sounded hollow. Miles used a flathead to pry it up, and beneath it, a long plastic sleeve sealed, and inside it, a single page, printed clean, folded perfectly. 3 names: Marcus Leon, Officer Todd Ellery, Councilwoman Jean Albrecht. And beneath the names, just 5 words: backup plan in motion, Friday. Today was Wednesday. Miles recognized Officer Todd Ellery. He worked one district over, assigned mostly to desk duty after a minor incident last year. No one had ever suspected him of anything serious. Councilwoman Jean Albrecht was a local name, well-liked, known for community fundraisers, and scheduled to present a new safety ordinance at Friday's town hall. Suddenly, everything made sense, and nothing did. Why these 3? And what connected them to Marcus Leon and the hidden documents from Camden? Were they part of it, or were they in danger? Ranger paced the squad room floor that night like he was waiting for someone to figure it all out. That someone had to be Miles. The visit to the house no one mentioned. Miles decided to pay a visit to Officer Ellery's home. No formal accusation, just a quiet welfare check under the pretense of follow-up. The house sat dark, curtains drawn, lights off. But Ranger tensed as soon as they parked. He stepped out of the cruiser and immediately barked. Not once, not twice, but rapidly until Miles knelt and whispered, "What is it?" The front lawn seemed untouched, but near the side garage a trash bin had been tipped over, and the side door, locked with a simple bolt, was half ajar. Inside the garage, a small laptop still running, screensaver looping. On the screen, one window minimized. Miles tapped the spacebar. It was an open messaging app. The most recent message: "Pick up final drop at Briar before Friday." He spooked, might move early. No name, just a symbol. Back at the station, Miles began searching archived traffic footage. Anything around Briar Street from the last 4 weeks. He filtered by pedestrian traffic. And there he saw him, Marcus Leon, once walking past the corner newsstand in a delivery uniform, another time sitting on the bench across from the pharmacy. Each time different hat, different shirt, same face, always watching, and always near the barbershop. That night, Ranger paced again, this time at the far end of the alley behind Reggie's. It was late, nearly 11 p.m., and Ranger wouldn't leave. He scratched at the concrete wall that bordered the old bus depot's basement lot. A narrow access door was visible near the base, locked tight. but once again disturbed soil nearby. They opened it. Inside were boxes, files, old police uniforms, and taped to the wall a city map with red X's marked in a straight line, leading from Reggie's to the town hall, and written in sharp ink, "Control the vote, clean the slate, disappear." The truth was bigger than a break-in. It was bigger than a fake ID. It was something designed to disrupt trust inside and out, and the only reason anyone knew was because a dog wouldn't stop barking outside a barbershop. The town hall stood at the corner of Main and Wexler, an old colonial-style building wrapped in banners reading "Stronger Together" and "Community First." On Thursday morning, with just one day before the big vote on the surveillance expansion bill, Officer Miles Vance stood outside the east entrance with Ranger at his side. The weight of what they now knew pressed down like the clouds overhead. Ranger's ears twitched as a city maintenance truck pulled up. Just another worker. Just another routine day, except it wasn't. Because inside the old storage room behind the barber shop, they'd found blueprints of this very building. Exit routes, blind spots, unmarked service tunnels that were supposed to be sealed years ago. And at the center of the marked grid, Councilwoman Jean Albrecht's office. When Miles entered the councilwoman's office just after 9 a.m., she looked tired but composed. She hadn't heard the name Marcus Leon before, at least not officially. But she had received a campaign donation 6 months earlier from a group called Arkland Community Forward, the same shell name tied to the man who ran the barbershop, and the person now confirmed to be at the center of the plot. Jean didn't know, that much was clear. But someone had been using her platform, using her scheduled vote as a trigger point. The digital overhaul bill? It wasn't just about surveillance, it was about control, and if passed, it would hand over admin rights for Glendale's entire municipal system, everything from street cameras to building access logs to a private vendor already compromised. Later that afternoon, Ranger began pacing in the squad room. Again, he moved to the window, stared down the street toward the bus terminal. It was nearly identical to how he'd behaved the day before, when he discovered the tunnel near Reggie's shop. Miles followed the dog's tension. Ranger pressed against the door, ears straight, nose twitching in the direction of the maintenance yard behind Town Hall. They walked there together, quiet, cautious. The moment they turned the corner, Ranger barked sharply, 3 times, and then lunged toward a covered equipment bin. Miles drew his sidearm, lifted the lid slowly. Inside, a discarded vest, delivery uniform, a cap, and a burner phone, screen cracked but still on. One unsent message blinked. "She doesn't know. He's watching from upstairs. If I'm burned, trigger plan B. 2nd floor." They weren't planning to influence the vote. They were planning to remove someone. Security was dispatched. The building was swept floor by floor. Ranger, leading the way, slowed outside a locked janitorial closet near the 2nd floor atrium. It looked normal, mop sink, old supplies, but Ranger pawed once, then backed up, then barked. Miles called for a key. When they opened it, behind a stack of buckets and bleach bottles was a crawl access, an old maintenance shaft that ran behind the council offices. And wedged into the duct opening was a camera, pointed not toward infrastructure, but into Councilwoman Jean Albrecht's office. And above the pipe, zip-tied to a metal rod, another envelope. Inside, floor access credentials for Friday's session, an entry log with spoofed timestamps, a note with 4 names circled, including Miles's own. At the bottom, one final warning. He's watching from inside. One more move and it collapses. That evening, with all city security refocused on the upcoming vote, Miles reviewed surveillance logs, every staff entrance, every late-night maintenance badge swipe, every vehicle near the depot lot. One stood out. A janitor's ID logged in past midnight the night before, but that janitor had called in sick. And the badge belonged to a name no one recognized, T. Markison. There was no T. Markison in the city employee database, but the badge had been used to enter the West Wing. Ranger was back at the building, and this time he didn't bark, he ran, straight to the west stairwell, where a hallway security door sat slightly ajar. Inside the janitor's closet, they found a man crouched near a backpack. He looked calm, like Reggie, and when they checked his ID, it was a duplicate, another alias. But they didn't need the name, they had the contents of the bag. Surveillance transmitter, duplicate ID badges, thumb drives labeled Clean A and Override B, a plastic bag containing a vial of clear liquid, and a printed note with the words, "Inject at 9:45, slip out before 10:10. He was going to drug Jean Albrecht during the vote, create confusion, stall the meeting, trigger the exit plan while everyone focused on the medical emergency, but Ranger had found him before any of it happened. The man was arrested. The plot, spanning almost 2 years, was pieced together in weeks. Dozens of files were recovered from the hard drives taken from Reggie's shop, the tunnel near Coral Creek, and the van outside the bus terminal. Names, movements, transfer logs. The network extended far beyond Glendale, but it had started here, with a cupboard, with a man who wasn't who he claimed, with a dog who wouldn't stop barking. At the next town hall, Councilwoman Albrecht opened the session with a single sentence. It wasn't the systems or protocols that saved us, it was instinct. 4 legs and a bark. Ranger didn't understand the applause, but he leaned into Miles's leg that night as if he knew something had changed. The barbershop had closed, but the silence it once held had echoed loud enough for someone to hear. And that someone was a K9 who couldn't be fooled. Stories like this remind us sometimes the smallest signs lead to the biggest truths, and trust me, what we've got coming next, you do not want to miss. So hit that subscribe button, drop a like, and tell us your favorite part in the comments. The next twist is just around the corner.